This video is sponsored by Squarespace.
If you really watch the movie, you go, wow, why would this movie incite violence? So you're shining a spotlight on a type of person that doesn't deserve the spotlight. Are we just gonna pretend that these type of people don't exist?
They think that we'll just sit there and take it, that we won't werewolf.
It seems forced and it seems wrong. I just hadn't really found it yet.
It's live with Murray Franklin.
Joker originated around 2014 kind of as an idea from Joaquin Phoenix. Around this mid-2010s period, Phoenix had been approached to appear in the MCU, being offered roles such as the Hulk and later Doctor Strange, but he decided to pass on them, with Hulk going to Mark Ruffalo, of course, and Doctor Strange going to Benedict Cumberbatch. He didn't have much of an interest in the heroes of those stories. Phoenix suggested to his agent that he wanted to do a character study on a villain instead. Ironically, he specifically singled out the Joker as a character he didn't want to tackle, summing his thoughts up at the time in an interview as, "You can't do the Joker because, it's just, you can't do that character. It's just been done." Phoenix's agent suggested he meet with Warner Brothers to see where they could take the concept, but Phoenix backed out and forgot the whole thing.
I jokingly say when Obama was president, I wrote and directed 3 Hangover movies. And then everything changed. Trump came in and suddenly discourses changed, and maybe...
Then came director Todd Phillips. Like Phoenix, Phillips had been offered several comic-based films over the years and declined them for similar reasons. He couldn't see himself working on that kind of project, but he also found himself thinking of a way it could work, doing something different, more grounded, a character study.
I have never really thought about doing a comic book movie. For me, it was more about this idea of doing a character study, but about somebody people have no idea who, what, where he came from or anything like that. So kind of came at it that way. It wasn't like, oh, I want to make a Joker movie. It was really came from like, how do you make a great character study and get people to want to see it?
But his main difference with Phoenix is he saw that the Joker was actually perfect for this concept. For an interesting reason, the Joker has had many iterations in media over the years, appearing in almost every screen adaptation of Batman, whether that's video games, TV, or films. He's by far Batman's most well-known and commonly seen member of Batman's rogues gallery, standing tall even next to other greats like Penguin, Two-Face, Mr. Freeze, or Catwoman. But what made Joker perfect to study is that he is, for the most part, a blank canvas.
He's a nobody, wants to be somebody.
And it was really a series of backwards engineering and thinking, okay, what do we know about Joker? Well, he has a laugh. Well, he has a white face painted and green hair and all these sort of things that we've come to know about Joker, and then running them through as realistic a lens as possible.
I think I felt better when I was locked up in the hospital.
But when it comes to his reason for being, that's a lot more open-ended. While some versions of the Batman mythos do give Joker a backstory, with the 1989 movie portraying him as Jack Napier, a gangster who killed Bruce Wayne's parents, and the Killing Joke comic strip portraying him as a failed comedian caught up in a robbery plot gone wrong. Most adaptations only give one concrete fact about the Joker's origin, that the crazy skin and hair came from him being thrown into a vat of acid. This gave Phillips a feeling that he was able to break the rules. And of course, one of the ways he did that would be by tossing the acid bath away completely.
Holy sh**, what kind of psycho?
Starting anew with Arthur Fleck.
In the comics, he fell into a vat of acid. I don't believe that if you fall into a vat of acid, you're going to have a white face and green hair. So it was about running everything through a very, giving him an affliction for his laugh.
Phillips would begin working on the script together with writer Scott Silver around 2017. They decided they wanted to make their own Joker. As Phoenix put it, "I didn't refer to any past iterations of the character. It just felt like it was our creation." A lot of the fear factor of his character came from his believability, with Phillips saying, "We wanted to look at everything through as real and authentic a lens as possible. Rather than someone turned mad by one bad day, the day he was shoved into the acid bath, Arthur Fleck's Joker is someone slowly pushed closer and closer to the edge."
Can you please stop bothering my kid?
I wasn't bothering
Just
him.
stop.
Before he chooses to jump right off at the end. Rather than a comic book supervillain story, the film became a narrative about how society can abuse the vulnerable and the consequences that can have.
And this movie started out with addressing, it wasn't started out in violence or even mental illness. Really, the thing Scott Silver, who I wrote the script with, and the original idea was, let's talk about this sort of lack and loss of empathy in the world we live in. What does it look like if you're raised in a world with no empathy?
Inspiration for this kind of broken character came from films like Taxi Driver, Raging Bull, and Phillips' own film, The Hangover, also being a source.
In a weird way, it was just in the DNA of the movie. I kind of say it as like, I just wanted to feel like it could have come out in the summer of 1979. But it's not necessarily, while Scott and I for sure referenced all those movies when we were writing it, and we watched all those movies just as far as pace and tone. When we got down to shooting it, it's not like you go, oh, that's the shot from so-and-so, and that's the thing. It was just more in its blood, so to speak.
While many do criticize this film for being a little bit too much like Taxi Driver and some other films. Another key figure in putting together Fleck's persona was Bernhard Goetz, a real-life killer who was dubbed the Subway Vigilante, after he shot and injured 4 teenagers who were planning to rob him on the New York subway.
Good evening. It is Christmas Eve in New York, and the talk of the town is not peace on earth, but the violence among us, this time in the subways, where a vigilante and his gun brought terror this past weekend. The victims were 4 teenagers. Eyewitness News has been on top of this story from the very start of it, and tonight we have team coverage as police press their search for the vigilante.
Leading to a controversial trial where he was charged with attempted murder and carrying an illegal firearm.
Bernhard Goetz was charged with attempted murder in the 2nd degree and criminal possession of a weapon in the 2nd degree. The assistant district attorney asked for $50,000 bail. Judge Leslie Snyder asked, what about the defensive nature of the incident, meaning self-defense? The ADA replied, in the case of at least one of the persons shot, there was no defensive justification. The shooting frenzy ended only when he, Goetz, ran out of ammunition.
He was found guilty on the weapons charge, but not the murder charges, having claimed self-defense. He at the time became a cult figure, symbolizing resistance to the city's rampant epidemic of crime, with widespread public approval for his actions. But this factor was dampened as it emerged that Goetz had frequently used racial slurs, which added a question to whether he was motivated by race. The facts surrounding the case also suggested his self-defense claims were much less credible than people thought, and he would later face a civil trial that led to him being saddled with millions of dollars in debt owed to Daryl Cabby, one of the teenagers who was paralyzed and received brain damage from the shooting. For the Joker, the racial element was stripped out. The 4 black teens became 3 white adults, and while Goetz shot preemptively, Fleck shoots after being violently assaulted, killing 2 of the men instantly and chasing down and murdering the 3rd. This scene shows the ultimate shift from Fleck to the Joker as he goes from being a downtrodden victim to a murderer. And the wave of vigilantism and public sympathy it inspires represents his turn, being the clown prince of crime. It also shows what a Gotham City without Batman looks like. Rather than Gothamites finding their hero in a savior who wants to save lives, they look to a broken figure.
We sat down to write a movie about empathy and the lack thereof in the world. We wanted to make a movie about the power of kindness, and that's genuinely where it started from.
Okay, we got a big show tonight. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
And now a word from our sponsor, Squarespace.
Gotham City can be a nightmare. But Squarespace has come to the rescue with Squarespace 7.1 with its fluid engine and newly added Blueprint AI and SEO tools. It's the easiest way to get a professional website for your business in Gotham City up and running. For anyone who doesn't have a lot of time to make a website avoiding all of the crime out there, the new Blueprint AI system helps build your website from the ground up, tailoring it to your specific business and industry. And instead of having to install a bunch of SEO plugins so people will actually see your site, the new optimized SEO tools will help launch your site and get seen fast with integrated and optimized SEO tools that will help your website grow fast. So head on over to squarespace.com for a free trial to test out these awesome new features. And when you're ready, go to squarespace.com/FrameVoyager to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain using the code from FrameVoyager. Now, back to the close of our show for tonight.
Thanks for watching. Good night, and always remember, that's life.
I hate it.
Selling such a bleak film to Warner Brothers was a challenge. They had their concerns about the tone and were more wary about DC projects after the poor performance of their DCEU franchise, also known as the Snyderverse. The failure of its then latest entry, Justice League in 2017, prompted a large reshuffle at DC, with the heads of DC film production John Berg and Jeff Johns being replaced by Walter Hamada, who began cleaning house by going through all the ongoing DC projects and advancing some and canceling others. Phillips said that Joker's low budget helped the project survive. With it being perceived as a smaller film financially, it stayed under the radar and avoided the chopping block.
Oh, I mean, the problem at Warner's for me was the regimes changed so often.
Oh, God, yes.
At a lot of studios, you know,
that happened.
studios, and so you finally get everybody on board, and all of a sudden they're gone. And now you're starting over, and when you start over with, sometimes people don't like to inherit other stuff from
Definitely
other people,
not.
right?
Though they avoided the chopping block, they had to deal with complaints from Jared Leto, who had taken on the role of the DCEU's Joker. Leto had received his debut as the Joker in 2016's Suicide Squad, but almost all of his material was cut from the final release. The emergence of a new project dedicated to the Joker that had nothing to do with him seemingly gave him anxiety about being overshadowed and having all the work that he put into preparing the character going to waste.
Is this a film you'd want to screen at the White House for the president?
I mean, I think that would be an interesting experiment.
These fears, in retrospect, don't seem to be unfounded, given that Leto never appeared in the DCEU again, except in a brief ending cameo when Justice League was re-edited and re-released years later as the Snyder Cut.
Au contraire, my little fish stick. He knows exactly what it's like to lose someone he loves.
Leto's complaints fell on deaf ears, though, with the fact that the film was a standalone project with no relation to the DCEU likely helping matters, as it allowed Warner Brothers and DC to begin distancing themselves from their collapsing, unpopular franchise, which had failed miserably at its goal of competing with Marvel's MCU. While Warner Brothers was mulling over whether to officially greenlight the project, Phillips had already started to round out his cast, recruiting Robert De Niro as the side character of Murray Franklin, while attempting to secure Joaquin Phoenix as Joker. While the role had only been written with him in mind, Phillips had to fight for him to commit to it, having to push against Phoenix's original reservations against comic book films, with Phoenix repeatedly being non-committal. It was even rumored that Warner Brothers was going to use a potential involvement from Martin Scorsese on the film to get DiCaprio or another celebrity into the role to fill the void Phoenix was leaving. But Phoenix eventually relented and signed up, something he said wasn't an easy decision. Who was going to direct was also an open question, as Scorsese had initially been mulled over as a director and producer for the film, but this ended up not coming to pass, and Phillips took on the project himself.
Two officers on the train were violently confronted by the crowd and tonight are in serious but stable condition at Dartmouth Metropolitan.
Filming would begin in New York City in September 2018, with the codename Romeo. In preparation for this shoot, director of photography Lawrence Sher and director Todd Phillips initially had plans to film on 65mm film, but Warner Brothers, while keen on letting Christopher Nolan do whatever he wants when it comes to film, likely adopted a more economical mindset for the filming of Joker. In another interview, Sher would say, Todd was really adamant about shooting film, convinced we'd just shoot 35mm like we did on his previous films. We drove around to 3 or 4 different places around New York City and captured imagery with no lighting in both 35mm film and Arri Alexa 65 formats. And when we looked at them side by side, we really loved the large format aspect of the 65. In the end, the Arri Alexa 65 won that film versus digital fight, as it was closer to the look that the cinematographer and director were aiming for, even if that decision was heavily influenced by the studio's desire to keep the production on the cheaper side.
That was the original thing, was to shoot large format film, and then Warner Brothers kind of shut us down on that, quite frankly. And then I was like, all right, well, then I even said to you, we got to shoot 16 millimeter film at one point.
Yeah, to go even further.
Let's go in the other direction.
Right.
But even though they would have to ditch film for digital, Schur believed that shooting with the Arri Alexa 65 and its larger sensor size would be helpful in up-close situations, saying, "We were often going to be quite close to Joaquin physically, in proximity, in his apartment in some of those scenes, a camera 3 feet away from him, which also has a real psychological effect of connecting you to a character and feeling that sense of intimacy. But now we didn't need to shoot it on a 21mm or a 24mm. And I do want to stop right here and point out that what he is perhaps suggesting, that, and this has been a hotly debated topic within the cinematography community for years, is that the size of a camera sensor in some way affects the depth of field and field of view and some other nuanced things. The best counterexample of this is provided by Manuel, who tested an Alexa Mini and Alexa 65 side by side, showing that with the correct calculations, you can achieve the same look and depth of field on a 35mm sensor that you can on a larger 65mm sensor. We talked with him last year in an unreleased video, and here's what he had to say about it.
There was always a discussion whether if you shoot on a left, if you have a different perspective on your scene or a different relation between your foreground and your background, because you would end up on shooting with different focal length for the same angle of view. I mean, before the test, I think my first instinct would have been to say, if you have a wider lens, it's probably going easier for distortion, for the barrel distortion, you know, where you have the round edges. I used some old rehoused Hasselblad lenses, the DNA primes. And on the Mini, I used the signature primes. And what happened then was that the longer focal length on the Alexa 65 was more distorted than the 18mm on the Alexa Mini. So it was quite the other way around.
Now, I don't want to get too sidetracked into this conversation because it's fairly complicated and warrants its own 20 to 30 minute video on it. There's so much math involved with it. Setting all of that aside, the need to film up close was a real one, no matter which camera was used, and it helped to create intimate moments for this film.
This proximity thing, you know, this lens here on this shot is our 58, which is like our favorite lens, right? So the 58, it's a Nikkor, it's a T13, super fast. Close focus is to, I think, 11 inches.
So you're real close.
Really close. This is probably 18 inches. But that intimacy, that physical proximity to Joaquin here makes a huge difference.
But filming Joaquin Phoenix is anything but easy, as he famously doesn't like to rehearse his performances at times and likes to let it happen in the moment.
We never rehearsed the character. We never talked really specifically about what he would do. All we really talked about was script and story and character, but we never talked about how are you gonna do it, you know what I mean? I think his process is one of surprise for himself.
And that process of surprise, even for himself, was apparent early on, with Joaquin saying after reading the script for the first time that he didn't know what to make of the character. I couldn't come up with any answers. That's what made me feel I had to do it. I felt overwhelmed and terrified by it. Usually when I'm scared of something, it makes me feel like I have to go towards it. Joaquin Phoenix is known for his strange process when it comes to acting and the cold feet he often gets when portraying a new character, as is evident in his last role he abruptly left from right before they started filming. For Joker, he read the script only a few times and never really read it again, even as the director would send him rewrites up until the beginning of the shoot. He would even reportedly walk off set multiple times to compose himself or call it a day when he had nothing left to give. He even had moments while he was trying to find something while filming a scene where he would get upset at the crew, but quickly apologize.
No, just like the constant whispering. Just shut the up, dude. I'm trying to like find something real. Sorry, it's only such a. It's not a big deal. It's not a big deal.
Many of the scenes in the film were felt out by both the director and the actor, changing elements in the moment and falling back on the script when needed as Joaquin found the character. We started communicating without needing to verbalize everything. We started to understand each other. It was hard to explain what it's like. It sounds fucking stupid, but it happened. We were locked into the same wavelength, having the same ideas simultaneously. Todd and I had it a lot. It was uncanny. For director of photography Lawrence Schur, making sure they didn't miss these spontaneous moments was key, and they would use multiple cameras to make sure they could get everything in one shot.
It's also anything Joaquin did, never rehearsals, nothing like that. You were seeing it for the first time live, so you just wanted to make sure if he did it once, And he never wanted to do another take. We got it.
To make sure to capture this in the moment approach, they would use multiple cameras to make sure they could get everything in one take.
We shot with multiple cameras as opposed to the single camera. Obviously, once you get 2 or 3 feet from somebody, it's gonna be hard to shoot multiple cameras. But interestingly enough, this over the shoulder generally was shot at the same time as this.
Some of the spontaneity changed versions of the script while they were filming. One of the best examples of this is the scene where Arthur runs into a bathroom after the subway scene where he killed 3 people.
We had scripted a scene where Arthur runs into the bathroom and he has to get rid of this gun that he had been given that was now evidence. And so he pulls the grate off the bathroom wall and he hides his gun in there. And then he kind of washes his face, the makeup off his face and all this stuff.
But the director and actor both felt that the scene just didn't feel quite right.
And when we got in the bathroom that day, it was just me and Joaquin, and we're standing there, we're trying to, should we put in this grate? We just start talking about, does Arthur really care about evidence? And does Arthur really care about, does he even know enough? Like, what did he see this in a movie, like hide a gun?
Phillips would then play Joaquin some new music that was being worked on for the film for inspiration.
That scene was the 2nd or 3rd week or something like that. It was very early on. And for me, it was really a defining moment, both for the character, but also for me and Todd's dynamic of working together. Todd was great. He said, let's just go onto the set, just alone, just you and me, and let's talk it through.
Listening to this, Joaquin started to dance to it. Phillips quickly got the cinematographer to start filming with just the 3 of them in the room, showing that intimate feel they had planned for. In the end, it is too bad that the film wasn't captured in 35mm or 65mm film, but at the beginning of the project's efforts were made to emulate the look of 5293 Kodak film stock as closely as possible, and their efforts weren't in vain. The look of Joker does have a bit of a filmic grit to it. Funny enough, Warner Brothers ended up giving Joker a limited 70mm and 35mm release in the end. And it's important to note here that the 70mm release we're talking about for this release is not the IMAX version of 70mm at a 1.43:1 format. And while an IMAX 70mm format didn't happen for the first Joker film, that is something that they are doing for the sequel.
What about the eyewitness report of the suspect being a man in a clown mask?
What kind of coward would do something that cold-blooded?
In order to capture the feel of a gloomy and uninviting Gotham, the film was shot in, of course, New York City, an iconic metropolis which, like Gotham, is littered with luxurious skyscrapers, but also quite a few shadier places.
New York is also the city of realms, and so I wanted there to be distinction between where Arthur goes to work, where Arthur goes to a comedy club, where Arthur goes to a hospital, what's in his neighborhood, what's out of his neighborhood. But we did lay out a city. It's a city of bridges and islands. It relates to the Gotham of the comic books, and we tried to relate New York to it. So everything is a riff on something, and we were kind of unriffing it back into New York and then re-riffing it back into our version of Gotham.
Many portions of the movie take place in the streets of Gotham. It required a joint effort from emergency management, the city hall, and the local police department to make sure everything went according to plan. The plan being preventing people from interrupting the shoots in any way and rerouting public transportation during the 3 days of shooting. Even when it comes to parking, there were certain time periods in which locals could park their vehicles. So shooting in the streets is an organizational nightmare, as I'm sure many people who have made films or even watched films know. And it caused some issues for the famous stair sequence.
Todd's idea was to set Arthur in the South Bronx. Not the Fort Apache South Bronx, but the hilly South Bronx. One where he's trudging up public stairways and through alleys and in non-grid-like streets. And it confuses his world in a good way. So it added a real character to where Arthur lives and to our Gotham. People don't think of hills when they think of New York.
Because of the New York City paparazzi laws, they had to change locations in order to find somewhere they could shoot without drawing too much attention too quickly.
Yeah, we actually looked a long time to try to figure out Arthur's neighborhood. You started in the South Bronx. We went through every borough, every bad neighborhood, and we ended up back on those stairs in the South Bronx.
A silver lining in filming in the actual city, however, was that this was also an opportunity to hire on more extras. However, some of those extras had their fair share of trouble on set as well. What those extras might not have expected was getting stuck in subway cars for several hours, with nowhere else to go and without receiving any attention from the crew for around 3 hours without being able to go on break. The extras revolted by banging on the subway car's walls, and some had no other choice but to relieve themselves there with no toilets available to them. The people responsible finally sprung into action and let everyone out, which of course was more than negligent on the film crew's part.
Good night. And always remember, that's
A large part of realizing this rendition of the Joker is makeup and costume, which is a realm that has more variables to consider than you would expect. One of those things being copyright laws. Did you know that clown makeup is copyrighted? This is an interesting problem Nikki Letterman had to navigate around. We tried out a couple of things to honor the design, but at the same time, I also had to make sure that the design didn't have any copyright restrictions, because there are hundreds and hundreds of clown faces out there, and each and every one of them are copywritten. Letterman said, "You can't duplicate them. You have to come up with something completely new. Otherwise, people could get sued." Which means that an original clown design had to be created. She created various digital mock-ups to present to Joaquin, and those designs were especially influenced by the documentary News from Home, which she was instructed to watch by Todd Phillips. The makeup would change over the course of the film, and it was never expertly applied. It at points became almost ghoulish looking, although there were problems applying these looks to Joaquin Phoenix, who isn't very fond of being touched and couldn't endure the painting sessions for too long. Being in makeup is hard because it's a very intimate situation where you're constantly being touched, and he wasn't really comfortable with it, Letterman said. But before we started even doing anything, he said, "I'm so sorry. I know I can be difficult, and whatever I do, please don't ever take anything personal. It's not you, it's me." This led to Letterman practicing the various face paints on not just Joaquin, but also other people she had around her, like a production assistant, so she could explore alternate designs and practice before Joaquin needed to set foot on stage. Then there's Arthur's hair, which is a shade darker than Joaquin Phoenix's natural hair color. A big difference for Arthur, however, is that he isn't great with keeping his hair washed and conditioned, so it was greased up a bit for the shoot. Joaquin also wore wigs on set, alternating from the striking green hair to his natural hair, as the shooting schedule required him to alternate between hair colors. There, of course, are other aspects to the look of Arthur Fleck, such as his frail frame.
We talked a lot about how skinny should Arthur be and how far do we want to go. And I kept saying to him, when are you going to start losing weight? Like, at what point do you start this? Because it was already like June and he hadn't started, and we started shooting in September, and he's like 180 pounds, which he wasn't fat, but we're talking about getting to 125 pounds. And he goes, I got it. I go, well, we can hire a guy. I got this thing. This woman who's a nutritionist might want to. No, that's not how I do it. I go, how do you do it? He goes, I just stop eating and I starve myself. And he just ate an apple a day for the whole summer.
There's a concerted effort to try and get as much on camera as possible. Todd and Mark have tried to fill out the world around the actors so that they can actually see it. And where the camera can't reach, that's where VFX takes over.
But every effect has to start somewhere, and for many films today, including The Joker, that start is a quick and properly stressful 3D scan. John Ashby from Aura FX did exactly that for Joker by lugging around specialized scanners and cameras that captured every detail on set. The scanners made use of LiDAR technology, and when checking out what LiDAR stands for, the acronym is short for Light Detection and Ranging, and it works by shooting a bunch of lasers across an object or environment and mapping out the environment based on the laser's time of flight. For one, any digital effect added onto set recordings needs to be tracked, which definitely can be done without LiDAR scanned material. However, it's certainly nice to have. The scanned environment can be matched to the film set, which makes the addition and removal of geometry in a scene much easier. This was especially necessary for this movie as it was filmed in New York, which arguably is one of the most iconic cities in the world. It was important to make viewers believe that everything that they saw that was happening on screen was taking place in Gotham, leading to some rather drastic alterations.
It's hard. New York's been shot so much, but even when they were in a place that has been shot, we're making it look unique to our Gotham.
It's using New York City as Gotham, but you have to take away the things that are particularly iconic about New York City. And so we're swapping out some buildings and making things look dreary, weather-worn, tired. It's creating this background that you always feel but never look at.
Before the film was released, it was met with a lot of criticism and controversy over the subject matter. The US military would kick this off by sending warnings to their troops about the possibility of a mass shooter showing up at screenings, likening back to the horrible shooting in Aurora, Colorado during a showing of The Dark Knight Rises. This memo was released after it had intercepted social media posts connected to extremists they labeled as incels from the dark web.
The movie won't hit theaters until next week, but Joker is already earning rave reviews, and now a disturbing warning.
Is it just me, or is it getting crazier out there?
Army officials at Fort Sill, Oklahoma are alerting soldiers about possible mass shootings at theaters showing the film. Though there are no specific plots, Texas law enforcement has told officials about potential threats made on social media.
The movie was actually not shown in the theater in Aurora where the shooting occurred after families of the victims had written a letter to Warner Brothers asking them to keep it from being shown there. Joaquin Phoenix and director Todd Phillips were peppered with questions during their press tour for the film about whether or not they thought the film could inspire mass shooters.
I don't know that we glorify anything. I think at the end of the movie, we are ultimately making an origin story of a villain. He has to be bad. Right? It's not, but I think if you're seeing it as glorifying him, you might be looking at it wrong.
Joaquin would walk out of one interview for an hour after being asked that question, as he had not considered or heard that idea before. But when he returned, he also still did not answer the question. Todd Phillips in turn went after some of the critics who believed this, saying, "I really think there have been a lot of think pieces written by people who proudly state they haven't seen the movie and they don't need to. I would just argue that you might want to watch the movie. You might want to watch it with an open mind." Warner Brothers would even consider not releasing this film to theaters, fearing the consequences if anything happened. But in the end, the film would be released to theaters with no issues and no violence occurring. It would go on to become the second highest grossing R-rated film of all time until, of course, Deadpool and Wolverine this year. And even with mixed critic reviews, it would go on to receive a Best Picture nomination, and Joaquin Phoenix would win an Oscar for Best Actor. It's an interesting question, though, when it comes to Joaquin Phoenix. Just how did he fall into this role that almost seemed perfect for him? What is behind that crazy smile and personality on set, but the quiet and shy one offset? Find out here on our video on the entire career of Joaquin Phoenix.